You may have caught the news today that ANZ has posted $1 billion profit. That's a billion with a B. It is a massive amount of money, isn't it? It comes after Westpac, ASB, BNZ. They also posted profits of around $500 million each. And these apparently are difficult days economically, or so they tell me. So it raises the question, are New Zealanders getting a fair deal, or are banks simply ripping us off? Now, we invited each of the banks on the show tonight. This is interesting in itself. Each of the banks on the show tonight, and the BNZ finally agreed. But an hour ago, they ring up and go, no, we don't want to take part. But Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz, he's got some worries about it all, and he is with us. Good evening to you.
Hello.
See, they're telling us the banks were telling us it's an industry problem, the industry were telling us it's a bank's problem. So, you know, we're going around and around. Do you think they're embarrassed by these numbers?
They're huge. When you look at how much profit they've made in the last year alone, $2.6 billion. And when you look at how they made that profit, it's mostly in interest margins. So the amount they take in and interest costs on what they lend to you versus how much it costs them to borrow. And those margins have been growing for the last year or so. So much so that the Reserve Bank Governor, Alan Bollard, came out a few months ago and said the banks are going to have to get used to having lower profits in the long run.
And so that's why they're making a lot of profits in the meantime. Why aren't we saying congratulations to them? I mean, business is about margins and profits, and good on them.
Yeah, well, the thing is, most of us are either borrowers or savers. And we know that the amount we borrow from the banks minus the amount we save is that margin in between. And the banks are taking an increasing share of that margin. And of course, New Zealand is quite an indebted country, and most of that profit gets exported to Australia because we've got 4 of those banks.
Although, having said that, one of the least profitable banks in the country, ironically, is Kiwi Bank, which is a local bank. See, all of this is about competition. There's competition in the market. So how is it there's so much competition yet wide margins? How is it you could look at Kiwi Bank, which is an option to keep the money onshore, and yet people don't use it?
Well, Kiwi Bank has been growing, and it has made profits too, although not as much in the last couple of years. The question is, 95% of our banking system is now foreign-owned, and there's quite a few banks, small building societies, credit unions that are trying to attack those big 4, but they're just so big. And New Zealand has so much debt that there's so much profit to be made. And there's some real questions now that the Reserve Bank should be asking, and also our political leaders, about how much of our economy has become financialised, how much it is so much debt is based there, and how much is too much profit?
Well, this is 2 points out of that. First of all, how much is too much profit, and how on earth do you... I mean, who are you to say it's too much profit? Who is anybody to say it's too profitable?
Well, the Reserve Bank has looked at the profitability of our banks and looked at them compared to other industries, and our banks are much more profitable in terms of return on equity, all those sort of key measures. Yeah. And rightly, and it's not just a New Zealand problem, around the world, people have realised that bankers' share of the national profit has been growing for the last 10 to 20 years.
But who controls it? I mean, who can do anything? I mean, the Reserve Bank will cut the rate, and you say banks pass it on to us, and they will do that, but I mean, that's inflationary. So who controls the banks? I mean, who would step in? Short of jawboning it, what do you do?
Well, the Reserve Bank regulates these banks. It can tell them how much capital they need to put aside. It can tell them how they fund their lending. It can tell them how much, for example, loan-to-value ratio should be. And our Reserve Bank has already fired a shot across their bows in the last couple of months and said, hey, we're a little bit worried about these profits. And then eventually it becomes a political issue, as it has in Australia, where these same 4 banks last year decided not to pass on one of the official cash rate cuts.
And they got jawboned by Gillard to pass it on. In fact, she's done that this week. But here's your other problem. What's going on in the world at the moment? What's our biggest worry? Banks falling over, banks not lending to each other, and yet here we are in this part of the world. They are cash rich, they're still lending. That's exactly what you want at this time, isn't it?
You do want strong banks, and they would argue good profits means strong banks. But there are also others who say our banks need to have a lot more capital behind them. They shouldn't be paying out such high dividends and should be even safer than they are now. Also, banks have got enormous profits, even though they're not growing anymore. Now, this is the amazing thing. The record profits we saw today from ANZ and from other banks has happened despite our economy being in trouble.
Although part of what that profit is about is fewer bad loans, which is yet another good sign, isn't it?
That is true. But a lot of that growth in profit, about $700 million worth, comes from expansion of their profit margins. And the Reserve Bank figures show this. So the banks have quietly, ever so quietly, reduced their term deposit rates, slightly increased their mortgage rates, and taken a bigger cut on the way through.
And guess who? Guess what? Yeah, but we've driven that, haven't we? Because one of the most profitable margins is floating rates. Who's rushed to the floating rate? We have.
That's right.
We've done it.
That's the irony here. The banks are making more profits when New Zealanders go to floating rates. It is sort of not, it's not intuitive. You know, you're paying a lower floating rate. Why should the bank be making more money? Because their funding costs are lower.
Good to see you. Listen, we've got to wrap it up. Appreciate your time very much. Bernard Hickey, good to be a banker at the moment, isn't it?